And looking at our agenda today, like Mary said, we do have quite a few things on our agenda. On our consent agenda, we have our previous minutes and our policies. Shall we break those down, folks? Thoughts on the previous minutes?
I didn't see anything in the previous minutes that caused any concern. So I'm happy to make that motion to accept the previous minutes.
Okay. If there are no other concerns, Aaron or Lisa or Kat, then I'll take the motion by roll. Aaron?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Kat?
Yes.
And Miranda, we are just taking, accepting votes on the previous minutes. I can see her lips say yes, I just can't hear her.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
And you have Emily on now as well. It's just not on video.
Okay. And our next item is the policies. Lynn, do you want to talk about this?
I tell something, take that out of order. Would you mind?
No, happy to. Okay. We'll move on and address this later. Is that what I'm gathering? Okay. Lynn, you're a little roboto.
Is Lynn with us? I can't hear a single thing that she's saying.
She was. But then I think she or Morgan tend to turn the camera off to save her, but now I
think there's no saving her at the moment. I will see if I can find the phone number and shoot that to her by text.
Okay. Let's, Morgan, are you aware of any other items that we should shuffle around on the agenda?
No.
Okay. Okay, so let's move to, and no visitors tonight other than Anne, who's just here to listen, I've been told.
That's correct.
Okay. So is Lenny with us?
He is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. You are next up on the agenda for school spotlight. Did you have something for that time slot?
I did not. I did not attend the fact that I had school spotlight. I could vamp for 5 minutes and give a little decent information for everybody. I don't feel like right now I would convey that. I don't think right now is the perfect time to do this, but I know that we were talking about school spotlight was a way to help make sure everybody gets a more intimate understanding of the different schools.
Yes. I would skip ahead to your report where I said you're still working on hiring a nurse. Did you have any luck there?
Well, so we interviewed a nurse applicant today that we're feeling pretty strong about. Part of this process has been really difficult, and it goes back to us sort of understanding the position. And when we were having the initial conversation about what kind of compensation structure we wanted to give, we were thinking that it'd be really easy to find an LPN, but what's happening is there aren't very many LPNs in the state anymore. There's a lot more RNs. And then when we were interviewing the personnel, it ended up they'd be a good fit, but then the compensation structure for the LPN position for these RN applicants ended up not working out. But we're feeling like the person we have here, we went down the road twice with applicants, feeling really good about wanting to hire them. And then when it got to the benefits package, they decided it was not appealing to them. So we kind of front loaded that conversation with this applicant, and they seem very interested in it. They're particularly keen on being in the school system and working as a school nurse. So we're feeling pretty positive. We're going to do some reference checks tomorrow and hopefully move forward with that candidate.
Good.
I
That's
know
good
it's-
news.
Right. And we really know it's got to be done. We try to get this done as soon as we could, but we definitely want to get this done in advance of more. So we have some lead time to get this nurse trained up and ready to do all this different COVID stuff that we have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Morgan, do we have Lynn back?
I think we do.
Hi, John.
Can you hear me yet, Jean Marie?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, so if I lose you again, I'm going to try to call back on the landline. Morgan, is this meeting set up that way?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Lynn, the floor is yours.
Okay. So, sorry for not being quite ready. I just got back about half an hour ago. I've been away for a little bit. I didn't expect before this meeting, so I just had to shift my thinking. So I'm going to go first to the policy piece. So I had sent you a
I think we lost you again, Lane.
I love the internet in
draft
Northern Vermont.
hybrid instructional model.
Lynn, we're not hearing you at all.
So I just sent Lynn the phone number to call in. Why don't we skip ahead for the moment to the principal reports and see if we can get her by phone.
Yep, perfect. Comments, questions, concerns for any of our principals?
I guess I don't know. I know it may be too time consuming, but I'm just would love to hear from principals how they're feeling. I mean, it's an unbelievable complexity of what everyone's trying to do in advance of the start of the school year. It might be nice to hear briefly from everyone, kind of how they're feeling and challenges, the small successes, the trepidation, whatever the kind of emotional spectrum is of contending with this really complex undertaking.
Any school principal want to kick that one around for a minute?
They don't have to. No one
No.
has to. I'm just,
Fine. I don't mind saying a few things because we've been through a lot and there's a lot going on, so it's way too much to try to get into detail. But I feel like working together as a leadership team to build that framework and the task list was really helpful for us to then take that task list and build our own school teams. So we have reopening teams on our own who are going through that task list and trying to make sure that we have gone through every detail on there to prepare as best we can. Will we miss something? Maybe, but we're all putting our best efforts in. And I feel like people are trying to just roll with it and be positive, and that's what we can ask for out of our staff and out of our teams that we work with, because we can't just get hung up on things. We need to roll with it, and we need to encourage our kids to come back, and let's try to do the best to get back to normal, even though it's not going to be quite normal. I think it's going to be great to have kids back in the building, and we'll be ready when they get there. And we have extra time with teachers. So I think we just have to make the best, make lemonade out of lemons. So that's all I
have to say that when I read your report, Sandy, I was impressed by the local lady in town who's made like a bazillion masks for all of your students and stuff. That's awesome. And I also thought that your PTO stepping up with that giant tent was a fantastic idea, and I hadn't thought of it before, but coincidentally I ran into one of the local moms here who is sort of part of our small PTO, and I mentioned it to her, and I don't know how much a need that is, but, and you folks would potentially know the answer to that one, but I just thought, boy, if that's a great idea, and we could easily do that in many, if not all of our towns, if it would be helpful.
Well, it's an outdoor space that we're hoping to at least to give a reprieve to the mask wearing. We can all take turns and kind of filter out there every once in a while, even if it's drizzly or rainy. And down the road, that tent has the walls with the windows. It's a full-blown event tent, so it's a 30 by 20. And down the road, maybe we can rent it out or something later on.
Yeah.
But I also have the Montgomery Conservation Commission, who has been in contact with me to try to make the outdoor classroom space through the path, through the rec path, and it's in the woods and it's a beautiful location. So, we're just trying to find some alternatives to being stuck in the classroom all day with masks on. So,
Yeah, some great
I-
creative thinking there.
I would echo that, Jean Marie, and definitely I'm interested in that. We've done some looking at some places with tents as well. So I think, if the PTO wants to help with that, that would be awesome in my mind. I've been talking with the teachers about making sure that we do get outside, and there's a lot of space in Bakersfield that we could use and utilize for not just recreation, but for teaching as well. So
this guy that went out of business was from Northern Vermont Tent Rental, and he's in Troy. He did have 1 or 2 tents left. His name is Wayne Gooley, but Northern Vermont Tent Rental was his company name. And I have his phone number if anyone's interested.
That's cool.
And it was
Thank
$1,000.
you. Even without the walls, just having a roof, like to be out of the beating sun even, I just thought that was a great idea.
We won't put the walls on it right now because we need to have the fresh air, but
Right.
down the
Right.
road.
Any other principal want to add in? Christy, talk to us about how things are going with your renovation project.
It's a little messy in Sheldon right now. It always gets darkest before the dawn, right? So we are in that everything's torn apart phase, and it comes back together pretty quickly, but right now we're really in the weeds for that. So I think that's been a little bit, challenging for people who've been trying to work in the building. I know our custodian is usually very proud of how clean the building is when people are coming back, and he's having some anxiety right now. So we say a lot of, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, just roll with it. And so, but the things that are coming together are just, really exciting. So I was in the bathrooms the other day and the tile's down, and it's like, oh, it's beautiful. And they were working on the gym floor. So it's really exciting to watch it come together. And it's also, been a long summer of it being not together. But the crew's been great. Lots of exciting work going on. And every day when I go in, because I don't necessarily go in every day. Like today they were working in the ceiling, and so it was really, really loud. But every time I go in, it's something new has happened. So.
Do you think, I know that there's been some issues regarding unforeseen things and related to the expense, but what about the timeline? If we put sort of the expense to the side for a moment, do you think that you'll be ready?
I think we are doubly glad that we are not starting until after Labor Day. We are still going to meet the timeline on a lot of the project, but there's, I don't know how quickly, and when teachers start coming back in the building, it just makes it a little more difficult for everyone. So they're supposed to continue working on the outside once kids get back. But the inside, except for the locker rooms, is supposed to be pretty much done. So,
Good, good. Did you want to talk about the finance side of the house now?
I can do it in my my
Okay.
section.
Okay. Do we have Lynn back, Morgan?
I think so.
I'm here.
Phew.
Nice.
I'm here by phone. Trying
Okay.
something new.
So let's go back to where you left off, Lynn.
Okay. So, I sent you a hybrid instructional model procedure for you to review. And then in the time that I was in my car today, we received some model policies from the VSBA for consideration. So this all stems back to decision-making guidance that we got about a week and a half ago after we had announced our reopening disposition from Secretary French. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we
Yep,
can.
you're good.
Okay. I just want to make sure because my computer went out. I've never participated this way before. So, so anyway, my reaction when I got that was when I read Secretary French's guidance and then he provided clarification, he was clear that he said it didn't have to be policy, it could be procedure. So there was no model for us to look at in terms of creating something. So I worked with a couple other superintendents to put together a hybrid instructional model procedure. But now when I just returned before this meeting, others are actually choosing to ask the board about the policy piece because this has been vetted by the VSBA and their attorneys as well. So there are two ways to do this. I think that the guidance was a little surprising to some when we read it in late July in terms of boards making the decision about delegating authority to superintendents around the reopening disposition or playing more of an active role on deciding upon the reopening disposition. So I wondered if the board members had had an opportunity to read that email from Sue Siglowski.
As you know, Lynn, this is Lisa. I did read it, and I actually brought it up as a question. Do we need to adopt one of the two policies that are put forth by the VSBA? At the time, this afternoon, I was told that procedure was okay. I'm only okay with that as long as the rest of the board is okay. I really probably would prefer policy and highly advocate for the first of the two policies, which is to delegate during the state of emergency timeline to the superintendent to come up with the school reopening guidelines rather than the board doing that work, because it's tremendous Herculean work and you're already so far ahead on that. But unless the rest of the board prefers procedure, I'm more comfortable with policy, but I could go either way on this, so I'm going to defer to everybody else now.
So I want to be clear, I'm actually changing my mind on this, given that this came today. So I had sent you the procedure because I had not seen a model policy yet. And Lisa, when we spoke earlier today, you alerted me that this had gone out. So I think that we can't take up this policy tonight because I didn't warn for a policy consideration. We were talking about procedure, which we can adopt procedure without going through the policy timeline. But if we want to consider adopting this policy, I need to bring it back and warn this for a future meeting. What are other people's thoughts?
Lynn,
So
can you, this is Mary, can you clarify what email you're talking about? I definitely did not receive the
So
email
you
you're
received,
talking about.
So you should have received something from Sue Siglowski from the Vermont School Boards Association.
No, I did
The
not.
title of it is Introducing 2 New Model Policies for Decision-Making During COVID-19.
I didn't
Should have gotten
It just came in
11:30.
around noon today, Mary.
And mine was in my spam.
Let me check my spam. Hang on a second.
Yep.
Okay.
So I don't know if somebody else is losing their internet now or if that was me.
I don't know who that was.
Okay.
We can still hear you okay though, Lynn. So
Okay,
I'm
so
just a
are
little
you-
bit unclear. Lynn, if
Are
I
you
can,
okay with not doing the procedure that I put in your board packet now that we have a model policy to consider? What I would like to do instead is bring the model policy back to you
as a
The time frame.
as a policy.
as a policy. And I would warn a special meeting. I would not want to wait until September.
Any idea
Right,
what
so
the
it'll be in
time
the next
frame
couple
for that is?
weeks.
Is it 10 days? I feel like it said 10 days.
Yeah. It is. So Morgan and I could look at that tomorrow and get back to you on that.
And Lynn, can you, definitely did not, I just checked my spam. I did not get that email. So
I'm
that
gonna
would be
forward it
helpful.
to the board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't get it either. It's Catherine.
Okay. You should all have it now. I just forwarded it to all of you.
And so, Lynn, are you asking the board whether the board would prefer this plan, the opening plan, to be solidified as policy or versus procedure? I mean, that's what you're asking?
Well, my original intention was to ask you to do it as procedure, but now that in the last few hours there has actually been a model policy sent out for board members to consider, after thinking about it and speaking just before this meeting with a couple of other superintendents, I think it probably does make sense because the legal counsel has drafted the model policy. It might make more sense to go there. I drafted the procedure for you in the absence of having anything else to go by. So
Okay.
if you would rather keep it as procedure and do that tonight, talk about that tonight, we could do that, but it doesn't make as much sense to me now that I've seen that there's policy recommendation.
And I'm going to jump in. It's Lisa again, just because we had this conversation a little bit earlier today and you had thought at that time that procedure was okay. But it appears now that more school districts are leading towards policy. So do we need a motion to remove it from our agenda or to call a
No,
special meeting?
you don't. I hadn't, when I spoke to you, I hadn't yet read the model policy. You still can do it as procedure. It does not have to be a formal policy. I did clarify that with the VSA, like I told you, Lisa, earlier. So it still could be a procedure, but the language in that model policy, I think, is worth consideration. That's something that's been vetted by attorneys. It's different than what I came up with for a procedure.
And I guess that's why I'm more in favor of going the policy route. Thank you.
I agree with Lisa. Would prefer to do it as policy.
So I will prepare a draft policy just taken from the model policy from the VSBA, if that's the will of the board. And I'll bring that back in a special meeting in about a week and a half.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I have under personnel, do you want me to just go right through mine now, Jean Marie? Sorry, I popped on and off
No,
so
yeah,
many
that's-
times at the start of the meeting.
Well, we chatted with our principals for a little while you were away, and So we're pretty much at you. We're ready for you to just keep rolling, I think, Lynn.
Okay, well, I will keep rolling. So in terms of summer hiring, I believe that the principals have updated you on any summer hiring that they've done. I do have one resignation to bring to you, and this is a late resignation. I gave an employee permission to apply for a leadership position after the contract was signed. We have a strict policy on not letting people apply for lateral moves, like a teacher in our district applying for a teaching position in another district. But there's such a leadership shortage throughout the state, it's pretty standard that if someone is shifting into a leadership role, that you release them from their contract. So Rebecca Marsh, I did give her permission to apply, and she is going to be the assistant principal at Browns River Middle School. So she did get a leadership position. So I would ask the board to make a motion to accept Rebecca's letter of resignation.
Does anybody want to make that motion?
I can make that.
motion.
Well, Aaron's hand was up before you, Mary, so thanks.
No
thanks.
problem. Darn it.
Okay. So by roll, Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Kat,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Emily, Emily, are you with us? Yes, okay. Aaron,
Yes.
and I will also vote yes.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think that's, did I get everybody? I think so. Go ahead, Lynn.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the decision to reopen in the disposition that we're reopening schools. And I just want to give a little context so people understand where we're at. So there were several factors at play in determining how we were going to reopen our schools. And, you know, this has been one of those decisions that people's reaction to the decision has been split in a variety of ways. So there are a large number of people who think we should have more children back. We should be opening up faster. There are a large number of people who think we shouldn't be returning to in-person at all right now, that it's too fast. And there are other people that are appreciative that we're taking a slower approach and returning part of our kids, hybrid model to start off with. So I know there's been a lot of things that have been talked about in recent press conferences from Governor Scott and other medical providers, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So we definitely have heard in the last probably week and a half a call for returning more students, particularly our pre-K through 5, to fully in person. And I just want to say we have the same priority. We want to be able to get our students back. From the start, we have been told as superintendents that we have to follow the written guidance about our reopening plans. And right now, the written guidance that we have is that health and safety guidance. I know that members of the medical profession have definitely started talking about the difference between 6 feet versus 3 feet. And that's something that as we were making the decisions around reopening, we were asking for quite regularly was, we were wondering if we have all these other layers of safety in place, can we get away with 3 feet versus 6 feet? And at that time, when we were going through that process, it was very clear that 6 feet was the recommendation. So everybody is kind of in a situation where they're doing their best. And, the data is shifting. The science, what people are learning from this virus is shifting over time, and the research is now indicating that it is safer for our younger kids under 10 years old to return more to in-person. So I understand, and I just want to acknowledge that the medical providers are using that science and they're using that data, and that makes perfect sense for them to recommend it based on that. And I know that the Agency of Education and the Department of Health are using the science to guide those health and safety recommendations that we all have to follow. What's kind of missing from the conversation right now is that the superintendents and the other leaders have had to take that guidance, and we've had to unpack it. And that's kind of what Sandy talked about a little bit earlier, is all the work that went into saying, okay, this is the health and safety guidance. How do we unpack this and put it into practice? So how do we operationalize what this says kind of logistically on the ground in our schools? And that's the piece that's missing from the conversation, because it's quite complex. There are some very big shifts that we're all going to have to make in terms of what school looks like and the practices we have on a day-to-day basis. So there are lots of things that we need to get really good at. One is health screenings. We need to get really good at the logistics around how people arrive at school, how we screen kids when they're getting on the bus, how we screen kids when they're arriving by foot, or whether they're driving themselves, or screening them at the car window when the parents are dropping them off. We also need to get really good at teaching new behaviors, first of all, to all of our staff, because this is brand new to most people. Everybody will be returning for the very first time on September 8th. Then we need to get really good at teaching our students. So right now, a lot of people have been following distancing when they're out in public, and a lot of people have been wearing masks. At the same time, you have some people who haven't. So that means some kids don't have a lot of practice. So our priority going through this entire process has been about how can we get our students and our staff back to school and keep the health and safety of our students and staff as our number one priority. So the way we do that is by being really strategic about how we bring them back. We have to get this right. The health and safety of all people returning to school depends on it. So I just feel like it's important for everybody to understand that that's all part of the consideration about returning in a hybrid model. So we were told at the very beginning that we were going to start as a state at a step 2, which is a little more restrictive, right? Prove that we can function in a more restrictive way, and that the likelihood would be that we would shift pretty quickly to a step 3. So we built our plan based on that information. So the hope is that our public health data will stay strong. The hope is that what the medical professionals are saying about the 6 feet to 3 feet is going to find its way into the health and safety guidance. And I'm hearing in the channels that that's coming, and we should see that in writing. We haven't seen that yet. I'm hoping that that comes. And if all that happens, I'm hoping that we can move quickly into an academic disposition where we can welcome more students back. The reality is, us starting in a more restrictive way with fewer students allows us to get this right. It allows us, small groups of students, to be able to explicitly teach about wearing masks and explicitly teach about physical distancing, and make sure that we have all of our screening procedures and other health and safety measures and protocols in place. So I think that the reality is that everybody really wants the same thing, and I think that everybody's looking at it from their own perspective and kind of how we can get there. So I just wanted to say that, because when we announced a reopening plan, I think that there might be some assumption that that plan and how we're coming back is how we're going to stay for the remainder of the year. And what I've been trying to remind people is it's very important for us to think about our plan as being flexible, because COVID kind of has a mind of its own, and we're going to have to be responsive in real time. So when we closed down in March, we didn't have much warning. We had to shift into a reactive closure mode. So our teams have been working around the clock, and I mean that quite literally, all summer long. And they've been building a really strategic plan that accounts for how will we behave as an organization if we are shifted into a step 1, that most restrictive where everybody is remote. And then how will we as an organization operate in a step 2 when we're kind of in that medium phase where it's restrictive, but we can have more people return to in person. And then how will we behave as an organization? And this is really decisions top to bottom throughout the entire organization and across all of our schools. What will that look like if we can shift into a step 3? So that's kind of been the process of making sure that we figure it out before we get started, so that if we do have to make shifts between those steps, that we have a lot of these details already figured out so we can more seamlessly make those transitions between steps. The reality is, I know that the hybrid model poses a lot of challenge for working families. That's been clear from the beginning, and I completely understand that. I think if we had to shift into a reactive closure and everybody was in a virtual situation, that also would pose a lot of challenges for working families. So what we're trying to do now, and this isn't visible yet to the public because we're not completely done, is we're trying to find out how we can support opportunities for families, for their children on the days that they're not in school. So part of that is looking at what are the resources that we have and what can we offer. We're working on a partnership with our 21st Century After School program to be able to ramp something up for Wednesdays so that we can offer some programming in each of our schools on Wednesdays. We're also working as a region with leaders at the state level and in the region to see if there are ways we could partner with child care providers to be able to see if we can expand on the number of or on the slots that they're able to offer to families. So there's a lot of work happening in the background to try to attend to that. And you might wonder, well, if we might be making a shift, right, if we're able to shift to a step 3 and that guidance comes out in writing, why would we attend to all of this stuff? I am purposely attending to this stuff because what I want to have happen is I want us to kind of have those options ready to go if we have to shift to a more restrictive phase at any point throughout the year. So much of the work that's happening right now is really purposeful, and it's about that preparation for kind of anything that might be coming our way. So I'll leave that part open. Does anybody have any questions or any leaders want to add anything in there?
Lynn, I just had one quick question from earlier when you were kind of the beginning of when you started talking. You mentioned something about the kids 10 and under and some of the kind of current medical thinking in that age group of kids. Can you clarify that? Because I was under the impression that they're identifying that younger kids, especially 5 and younger, can carry 10 to 100 times the viral like the RNA viral load compared to adults, and are very efficient spreaders of COVID-19, which I'm just mentioning in light of, especially in school buildings where we may have staff, older staff or staff who fall into that kind of category of
Right.
having immune issues that make them more vulnerable.
So I think that the press conferences, probably the last 3 press conferences or 4 press conferences have really attended to a lot of those things, Mary, where Dr. Levine and other health experts from around the state, and I'm not going to be able to tell you who they were, have been really clear about the science behind kids 10 and under being less likely to spread the virus to one another. there was a research study that came out, I think late last week, that said exactly what you're saying, and Dr. Levine, I think, addressed that in yesterday's press conference. And I think what he's saying is that that's an isolated study, and I'm not going to get this exactly right because I wasn't like listening and taking notes during that press conference, but they're still standing by that they feel it is safe for kids 10 and under, that this is the right time to bring them back to school, and that we have the capacity to be able to do that.
Okay.
In terms of more on the science and the studies, Mary, that's a little out of my realm, but this is what I'm following in the press conferences, and that's what I'm taking away from it.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, you have to work with what our top public health officials and doctors are saying. And I think the problem is it's so new and there's still so much that is not known and understood. And we're kind of making the road by walking it. So.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the reality that we all know and we've known from the beginning is that our kids need us. Like they need to return to some form of normalcy, and that's what we all want for our kids, and we want to be really strategic in how we do that. We want to bring them back really thoughtfully and make sure that we have those opportunities to teach in small groups, and that not just our students feel comfortable, but also our staff can have the opportunity to practice and to feel comfortable with some smaller groups before we return more students into the schools. So it's really been a very complicated, multifaceted process to try to get where we are. And, I certainly have received some strong messages from our community in kind of all directions of people thinking that it's, we're not being thoughtful by going too fast, or we're not being thoughtful by going too slow. And I can just assure you that we have been as thoughtful as we can be, and we've had to look at this from all kinds of different angles to try to make the best plan that we can for our students and our staff who will be returning on September 8th.
Lynn, another question. In the kind of the three phase or kind of three tiers of from fully remote to the hybrid, and then the third one, can you remind me the third kind of option or kind of possibility of much more in person, maybe even, may I be so bold as to suggest a 5-day a week school week? That is going to be largely dictated by public health data and numbers, correct?
Right. I mean, we haven't seen the updates to the health and safety guidance. We know that there are updates coming, but we don't know exactly what they are. So we'll have to be able to unpack that and determine, what is this telling us? Is this focused on a specific age range that gives us some more flexibility with a targeted group of students? Is it going to be targeted at all students? We can't really determine what that 3 is going to look like until we see what the update is, and thinking through to going back to that piece that I shared earlier, is that we were told from the beginning to start more restrictive to prove that we can function under that more restrictive kind of scenario, and then that we would quickly shift into a 3 as long as our public health data held firm. I also know that they're watching a lot of things as a state. They're watching, what's kind of coming at us from, all around Vermont. If you look at the colors change from week to week, there's a lot happening near us, not in Vermont. Vermont's still doing pretty well, but there's a lot kind of coming our way that they're watching. And I also know from watching the press conferences that the people who are working on this are very much watching out for what's going to happen when students return to colleges at the end of August. And our start date has now been pushed back to September 8th. So they'll have about 10 days worth of of data before we return our students to in-person. So I feel like all of that will likely play in to whatever written recommendations come our way. So I'm hoping that you as a board and people in general will understand that there's so much more to this than meets the eye, that this has been quite literally the most complicated work any of us have done professionally in our lives, and I can say that without question. And I'm pretty sure the principals would say the same thing. So, if you don't have any other questions about what I just shared, I'll move on, and you can come back to it if something comes up. Where we're at now is where we're kind of at we have been gathering a lot of data, and a lot of what we're doing, a lot of what our steps are going to be informed by not only that public health data, but also about our data. We need to know the number of students who are going to be returning to in-person learning in our public schools. We need to know the number of students who are going to be whose families are going to be choosing to keep them out this year in the fully remote option for learning. And then the other bit of data that we're starting to unpack is which of our staff members will be able to return for in-person instruction. So as Mary kind of alluded to earlier, we do have some staff members who fall into higher risk categories, and it will be difficult for some of them to return. So some of them are having to make some pretty challenging decisions about what they're going to do as we shift back to in-person instruction. So we're trying to unpack all of that, and it's all going to play into the next week. A lot's going to happen within our leadership team as we work through what's our fully remote learning model going to look like for our K through 5 and our 6 through 12, and what does that mean in terms of our staffing structures within each school, and who's teaching in person, and who do we have that could be working on the fully remote learning option as well. So a lot of work ahead of us. Very, very thankful for the September 8th delay. I think that was a big relief to have that. So speaking of the September 8th delay, I'm going to take a little gamble here. So the governor pushed the date back to September 8th, but he doesn't have the authority to decide to forgive student days. So we need that time with our staff members, and I need to be able to use those days for professional learning. So one of the things that the Vermont legislature is going to be asked to take up when they return on August 25th is reducing the number of mandatory student days from 175 to 170. Because the reality is our master agreement is fixed. Our teachers have 187 days in their contract. And if I use those for professional learning days, and then those 5 days are not forgiven, we'll have students for 5 days at the end of the year, and we'll need to compensate teachers for those days because they will have already worked for in-service. So my gut tells me that I testified at the House Education Committee last week, and it appeared that at least that committee was very open to the idea of forgiving those days so that we can use those with our teachers for professional learning. So as an organization, that's our intention. This is one of those, we have to make the decision before we know kind of what the rules are going to be, because by the time the legislature makes the decision about those days, we will have already had those professional learning days. So just wanted to tip you to that. I've seen some of you on some of our virtual town halls. I've scrolled down and seen your names. It was good to see you there. We have completed 3 of our 6 virtual town halls. We have our 4th tomorrow with our parent group. And then next week we have our final 2 focused on the final 3 sections of our reopening plan, and that is after school programming, transportation, and then the leadership policy finance. So any questions about any of that? So I rolled much of the F, G, and H on my agenda right into what I said earlier. So one thing I want to add in is about the 21st Century After School program. So they're pretty key in planning for this. So they've definitely been a part of, you know, we had our summer programs running this summer. We're one of the only organizations in the state who chose to run. So they have been practicing some of these guidelines this summer and, you know, given us feedback, and that's been very helpful. And the coordinator has also been a big part of working through our reopening plan. So their help is going to be essential for our Wednesday work, and it's also going to be essential in terms of what we're able to offer families both before and after school when we return in the fall. They're also doing some really creative things to try to provide some enriching remote opportunities for students this fall, so I'm excited about that. And the last thing I have on my agenda is the NMV Elementary School Choice. The participation for school choice, you put that out there for the first time. You had one family take you up on that policy, and this is the within NMV policy. So you have one family moving from Berkshire to Montgomery. So you have two students who are moving under this policy. You did have others ask, and you probably had another 4 families ask, but they were asking for from within NMV to outside of NMV, so they did not qualify under your policy. We have not hit the deadline yet for the intra-district or inter-district policy, but I think you have at least one family who will be applying for that so far. So stay tuned at the September meeting. I'll report out on that one. Is there any questions?
Lynn, I just wanted to, I don't know if you're done. Do you have more stuff on your agenda
Nope,
here that you're
that's it.
going over?
That's it.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, you know, kind of a very deep, heartfelt thanks, you know, to you and really to everyone at the administrative central office and all of our administrators in the building. I mean, the level of complexity and nuance that you all have been kind of crafting over the course of the summer is really it's really remarkable to me. I think we're very fortunate. There will be no plan that satisfies where everyone kind of is on this spectrum. Too little, too much, you know, the Goldilocks conundrum that COVID presents us. But I see you threading a really, you know, delicate needle here and doing it really well. I mean, this is an unbelievable kind of everything you've outlined that you all are kind of offering, the kind of home study online component, which meets the needs of the families for whom, you know, that just doesn't feel comfortable being in school, and kind of trying to find something that works for everyone. It's nearly impossible. I just want to thank you. I really, it's an unbelievable time to be kind of on the planet in the midst of this pandemic. And I think everyone's just doing the best they can. And I want to just thank everyone at the administrative level, especially for what you're crafting for this community.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions for Lynn or comments?
I just want to make a comment for people who might be listening to this or viewing it a little bit later, that what Lynn was talking about in the beginning of her presentation about the guidance that comes from the state level. I want people to understand that this is not really a local decision. Many of these decisions are being made by the medical community in conjunction with the state government. So it's up to the superintendents and principals, as Lynn said, to unpack all of this and see how it works in individual buildings, which is a Herculean task, really. But I do want people to know that this is not just something that your superintendent has dreamed up for school reopening in Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union, that this is really guidance that is coming from the state level, from the Agency of Education and the Vermont Department of Health. And they're very specific about certain regulations, and it's up to us to follow them and follow them right. So all of this very careful work, very thorough work is very important. And I know you may hear dissenting opinions throughout the community, but please keep in mind that this is your administration and your school employees who are carrying out something that has been directed from elsewhere, from a higher level. So thanks again, Lynn.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that that part gets confusing because I think there's a lot of discussion around local decision making. And although that is true that we've been able to figure out how, what I think Secretary French is calling it the disposition for how we're going to be returning, we've had to be able to unpack that guidance and kind of create operational definitions, if you will. And I've been thankful to have my colleagues throughout the Champlain Valley to be able to do that really complex work with, because the guidance are really explicit, but there is no roadmap to tell us how to do that. And that has been the challenging work. So it certainly hasn't been without a lot of thought. We have been able to make the decisions within the really strict guidelines that we've been given. Thanks for clarifying, Lisa.
And Lynn, I just had one question. Did you say that you're expecting more or some revised guidance coming out soon? And if so, do you know when you'll be seeing the next revision?
So this has been the tricky part, and I've overused this analogy, like I said in a forum we had last night, is that we're all in this plane together and we're building it, and we're kind of getting the instructions for how to finish building it before we land it. And the reality is everybody's from all levels, I'm confident everybody is doing the best they can. So I feel like we probably have state officials who are waiting for guidance from the federal level. And then you have people in my role who are waiting for guidance from the state level. And it kind of trickles down. So I know that some of our families are pretty anxious to get some decisions from us. The reality is there's still some guidance coming to us, so we can't finish putting the rest of the plane together before we're ready to land it on September 8th. So our reopening framework still says draft because there's quite a lot that we're still waiting on. So I know that there is health and safety guidance updates that are coming our way. I also know that we still have guidance coming for special education. We have guidance coming for social emotional learning. I believe we have guidance coming for our after school program. And I thought there was also guidance coming for career and technical education. So there's still more that we need to know before we can finish building the rest of the plan, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
Lynn, I had another question. Are you hearing that was one of the factors in the governor pushing back the start date because they want to see what happens when 10,000 plus students return to college, the UVM and other colleges in a couple weeks?
So I think that some of the guidance that I get is coming from the agency or the Department of Health, and I get recommendations from other professional organizations as well. But I also get a lot of my information from watching the press conferences, and I believe that was at a press conference that I kind of read between the lines that they're also waiting to see what happens with all of the students returning at UVM. I don't think that they're going to wait on the health and safety guidance to give that based on that, but I do think before they make a decision to shift us from a step 2 into a step 3, they might wait and see what happens with the return of all of the UVM students to Burlington.
Yeah, that's a nerve-wracking thing for sure. I'm not feeling personally optimistic about it.
I'm here representing your friends in higher education to say, yeah, it's gonna. I don't
Yeah,
trust college kids as far as I can throw them, and so as much as that's, I think the beauty of having the younger kid, like they're more malleable and they'll really kind of do what you tell them to do. As much as we tell them to wear a mask and sanitize their hands and put disinfecting wipes out and all that jazz, like you all know as well as I do what you did on weekends when you were in college, and it was not saying 6 feet apart from people. So we're hoping to keep them on campus until just before Thanksgiving, but boy, we'll see. Any
It's a
further
tricky time
questions
we're
for
all
Lynn?
living in.
Yeah. Anybody have any more comments or questions for Lynn, or we can move on to Morgan? Okay, Morgan?
Okay, thanks. Your financial reports went out by email today. This is the last monthly report for last year. They are not yet audited, and the audits won't be done until December, but it appears that we spent about $390,000 less than we had budgeted, and we took in a few $1,000s more of revenue than we anticipated. It's a little hard to pick out the revenue piece on that report because of the way our software treats fund balances. I kind of pretend when we're setting the budget that that's revenue because that makes it easier to show you guys what the tax rate's going to be, and the accounting system doesn't recognize that as revenue. So that's good news always when you take in more than you spend. For the budget that we just voted on that started a month ago, we had brought forward a fund balance of just over $300,000. And because of the position that we're ending in FY20, it looks like we will have the opportunity to bring more than that forward for the FY22 budget. You, the board, have the option to propose other uses for that, and at least the 3 of you that I've worked with for many years in the past have chosen to give voters the opportunity to put some of that into a capital reserve fund. We may be in a position to do that, although with the concerns about coronavirus and its impact on the ed fund, we're really not going to have any idea what that looks like until likely mid-December. In that report, I also gave
Can I
you
ask you just one question before you go on, Morgan?
Sure.
One of the things at the college level that we've been able to tap into was the CARES Act fund, and we've been able to charge back PPE and a wide variety of things. Is that's not available to us in the K-12 world, or is there some way that you are trying to categorize the spending that you're using on those things potentially for something later?
Yeah, and I put a little bit of that in the report. We've got two pockets of federal money that we have access to. I had explained a little bit about the guidance that we received last week on the uses for that money. And earlier today, the agency started walking that guidance back. So I am going to say that we know there's money out there, but I'm no longer confident to say what I think it can be spent on or what I think their intention is in terms of using the money. I felt pretty good about where that was going 12 hours ago, but given what I saw today, I don't. And I apologize, it's kind of a recurring theme for you guys, and basically ever since April on that. But there is money available, and we're hopeful that it will cover expenses that we would not have had to incur if it weren't for the coronavirus response.
Morgan, I think that's the best bet for you to count on right now is unbudgeted expenses due directly to coronavirus. So if you just keep those in mind, that's probably what you're first going to get reimbursed for and most likely get reimbursed for without too much trouble, as long as you're keeping good records. And I know you will.
Any other questions on the update?
Yes, Morgan, I have one question, and I'm sorry I did not attend the last meeting, and it's about the small schools grant. I know that you thought that it was one school and it was actually the other school that didn't get it. Where did we land on that?
So where we have landed is your lawyer is working with folks at the Agency of Ed to craft the language that would fix that in statute. And Lynn's reached out to one of the senators who's willing to bring that up when they reconvene later in August. And so once we have that language, we'll tip you to that so you know who to look for there.
So I just want to, I want to,
now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So I just want to say that I did reach out to Senator Starr because he was instrumental in the work in the legislature last year to add the language that allowed Bakersfield to keep the small schools grant. So we reached out to him, and we think that, if our attorney can work with the agency to figure out what the clause was that then made it tricky for us to keep Montgomery's small school grant, we think that he will be agreeable to bringing that back to the legislature. And certainly, Lisa, will want to make sure that you see that too.
Thank you.
So Christy gave you a little bit of an update on the envelope project in terms of the schedule. We did have a little concern around getting some of the tile, I think it was, on site because of coronavirus and the disruption to supply chains. But with the extra week, it looks like we're going to be on schedule for what we needed to accomplish before we had kids back in school. There are actually, as of this morning, there are 3 change orders that I'm going to ask board approval for. 2 are definitely above our authority. 1 I could split up and do it under my authority or Jean Marie's authority, but I think it makes more sense to just bring it forward to you. 1 is reacting to changes that are being required by the electrical inspector who came through recently to check on the progress. Another one is around extending some vents to basically to reach outside walls, which are now going to be thicker. And then the last one is around the change to the roofing, which I tipped you in your report when Spates demoed the overhang in front of the front door right outside of Christie's office. They found they actually found water, and they found significant rot and decay there. And so as they dug into that, two flatter sections of roof, which are a TPO, a membrane material, were both, looks like they'd been impacted, and they had tried to do some fixes in the past, which were not successful. So we've got a quote to basically pull that up and do that correctly. I did try to see if I could run that through as an insurance claim, but because it was long-term damage rather than a specific event that happened to cause the damage, they denied that. I can give you dollar amounts for the electrical inspector and for the extension of the vents. I do not want to give you a dollar amount for the quote for the roof, and that's because Spates, who's the general contractor, is still trying to get a second quote. And so I don't want to sort of damage the integrity of that process. I do not believe that quote is going to come in lower than what I have in front of me. But if you wanted to discuss that in detail, I would just say we could go into executive for that piece because it is contract negotiations. I will tell you on the two that I can speak about in open session, the one for the ductwork is $11,190, and the one for the code upgrades is $5,842. I can also tell you that if those are approved and the roofing PCO that I would recommend are going to be improved with all the other changes that have come through, we're running in the deficit right around $60,000 for the overall project. I do think I'm carrying a little too much money in the architect line and a little too much money in the clerk line, but I don't know that for sure. And we won't know that until we get to the end of the project. There are a few other change orders that we have not approved yet. If we do, it will be because they're really ongoing maintenance that needs to happen anyway, and we would just tuck them in the general fund in the amount of money we have for those repairs to the building anyway. So given that, do you want me to take you into executive so you can see the roofing number?
I would like to see the roofing number. I feel like we're starting to kind of head into enough cost overruns and unexpected and kind of unanticipated costs that it would be nice to have some sort of kind of context about this roof.
Sure.
And the numbers. Morgan, can you clarify? You said we're kind of $60,000 over budget at this point. That includes these new overruns that you're asking for approval around.
Right. That includes everything that I know about.
And so, and where are we pulling the money with the kind of overruns and costs? From the general fund, you said?
Yeah, so you will have some options. We can put it to the general fund for this year, and I would say the time to have that discussion is going to be in November, when you have a more solid idea of how many tuition kids you've got coming, and if you're going to get a credit or another bill from the schools that you sent kids to this past year. So last year you had a pretty significant bill that was owed to Enosburg because their tuition rate came in a lot higher for FY19. That just as likely could be a credit coming back for them. You also had fewer tuition kids come through than we expected, and so you had some money left over last year due to that. And those are sort of the big factors that went into setting your end of year fund balance that we're anticipating now. The other option that you have is if we do end up in a position when we're warning a budget in January where you want to ask the voters to put money into a capital improvement fund, that money would become available instantly. So we would look at the end of the year, say around next May, decide where we're going to end with the general fund and whether it would make sense to leave those expenses in the general fund, or if the capital fund is approved, you could move it into that. Did that answer your question? Or was that too
Yeah,
much?
no, that's super helpful. And I mean, we also have, like, Sheldon has a reserve fund that came to the merger with too, correct?
Sheldon did not. Berkshire had a
Oh,
big
okay.
one, and Montgomery and Bakersfield each had relatively small ones.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Morgan.
Yeah.
Is there any other additional business that you want us to get through before we move into executive?
That will be it for me.
Okay. And you're the last one. Okay, you would like a motion to get us into executive?
Yeah, and I think you can let Sandy and Rhoda and Lenny go if you want. We wouldn't let Ann into executive, but she can hang out in the waiting room and we'll let her back. And same with Caroline.
Okay. So first, who would like to make a motion for executive session?
I'll make that motion.
I can make that motion.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Aaron, what's your pleasure?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Kat?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Miranda?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you're out of executive, and I just need to pull Caroline back in. I think she's coming. I bet she'll be here as soon as the minutes need to reflect your vote. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so who would like to make a motion regarding the change orders?
I can make that motion to accept the PCOs 21R, 27, and 28 as presented.
Okay. By roll, Aaron,
Yes.
Lisa, okay, Kat,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
and Mary.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, I think we're at the bitter end here. Lynn, are you still with us?
Still here.
Okay, any parting thoughts from anybody before we move to board business? So our next scheduled meeting is September 2nd, but you're going to call us in for a special meeting for regarding the new policy, right, Lynn?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Did I interrupt somebody?
No, but I have a question. Do you have a date right now that you're thinking of? Since you know what it's going to look like? And maybe I'm forward stepping. Maybe you don't know what it looks like yet.
I don't.
Okay.
So
That's okay.
Anything else from the crowd? I just want to say I am so tired of these video meetings when I have to call on all of you individually. Can't we just do this together? Lynn, don't you have some spot where like we can just like sit outside, socially distance, and do one in person?
I don't know. What we have been told is that we need to remain on virtual. This is the way, when you unpack the guidance, we can't have visitors in our schools. So we can't return to a public meeting in our schools and still protect the perimeter. So I believe we're doing some virtual meetings for a while.
Fine.
You really want to propose like a board tent in the middle of a park somewhere.
Okay, well, thank you all. If there isn't anything else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Emily. You can all signal by giving me a thumbs up and by leaving the meeting. Until next time, thank you all.